Three reasons here why Sunday is regarded as a special day, obviously, for Christians and Christianity throughout the millennia. So here are three quick reasons. First, so most Christians believe Jesus was killed or died on Friday afternoon. Second, it's Resurrection Sunday, obviously, the first day of the week, which involves communion, the collection of money, as we will see. And it also had a Christological signification behind it, and it was about things starting anew, a new creation. And third and last, history and tradition tell us why the first day of the week is commemorated in this way. So let's start with crucifixion. So all four gospels agree Jesus died Friday afternoon. As you see here in Mark 15:34, and the other gospels recorded as well, around the ninth hour, which is around 3 p.m., Jesus cried out, and then immediately after it said that he died. He gave up the spirit, it says, which simply means died. So that's also in Matthew 27, verses 45, 46. And then Mark goes on to say that this all happened on Friday, the day of preparation, that is the day before the Sabbath. And again, that's recorded in Matthew, Luke, and John. Mark 16:9 says that Jesus rose early on the first day of the week. Now, I know that there are debates about this is part of what's called the long ending of Mark. So it begins from verse 9 onward. I think there are 1,500 plus manuscripts of Mark with this so-called long Mark ending. But in only two examples dated to the 4th century, you do not have this. So, which tells me that it's probably original to Mark. And especially because it's known by the earliest patristic writers like Irenaeus, Justin Martyr, and they go back to almost the 1st century, as late as the 2nd century AD. It's almost 200 years before those two late Greek manuscripts. And then the Gospels say that the empty tomb was obviously found the first day of the week, and that's throughout the Gospels, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. Now, another reason was because of communion service. So in Acts 20, verse 7, on the first day of the week, we came together to break bread. So that's Luke's account, which coincides with what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11. When you meet together, you are not really interested in the Lord's Supper. Goes on, Paul, to admonish them that they were not having what you might call a regular meal, but that they were having the meal that we know as the Eucharist or the Lord's Supper. Do you really want to disgrace God's church, says Paul? So this is obviously in the context of communion. And then what's telling about this passage is that Paul goes on to give instructions on how to do the Eucharist or the Lord's Supper communion in church. Another point about Sunday is the collection. Under the Old Covenant law, the Jews used to have a collection for the poor or a charity box. So this is from the Encyclopedia Judaica. In every town where there are Jews, they must appoint charity wardens, men who are well known and honest, that should collect money from the people every Sabbath eve and distribute it to the poor. According to Mark, Jesus was teaching the people in the temple, and he was opposite the treasury, and Jesus was observing how the people were putting money into the treasury. Again, a well-known Second Temple practice during the days of Jesus and the apostles. Now, the reason this is important is because in 1 Corinthians 16, Paul now says, concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you also are to do. On the first day of every week, each one of you is to put aside and save, as he may prosper, so that no collections be made when I come. So now the collection is not gathered at a synagogue or the temple. It's gathered clearly in the churches, and it's every week, the first day of every week. The Dictionary of Apostolic Church says it is most natural to infer that there was not only a setting apart of gifts, but also a paying into a local fund week by week. This strengthens the view that verse 2 incidentally gives evidence of early movements towards the setting up of the Lord's Day as an institution. Note, an institution, not a commandment as such, right? So this is an institution, especially when taken along with Acts 20, verse 7, which we read. For when could the contributions of the people be better collected in readiness for the apostle than at their meetings on the special day of worship? Again, I must emphasize this was a Christian institution, a special day of worship. It is not a commandment as such. In other words, nowhere are we told you must get together on this particular day. No, this is a, how would you call it? Something that organically starts to occur very early on with the early Christian movement as a special day of worship, of communion, and here with collection for the poor. Another comment about this New International Dictionary of New Testament Theology: some have interpreted the words each one of you, or by himself or herself, in 1 Corinthians 16:2 to mean at home. But then why mention it doing it, and every week, remember, every Sunday, every first day of the week, when they could just as well do it regularly at home at other times? The meaning must rather be that the Christians were to bring their offerings to church on Sunday, since that was the day they assembled for worship. And then they note there a comment from Justin Martyr that we will get to, where he mentions this practice very early on. So Justin Martyr is writing around as late as the 2nd century, as early as the 1st century. And then it has this Christological significance, the first day of the week, Sunday. So Martyr notes that the light of the world rose from the night of the grave on the first day of the week. The Jewish Encyclopedia notes that the ancient rabbis taught that 10 crowns adorned the first day of creation. So even before the Christian era, the days of Jesus and the apostles, there was already an expectation that the first day of the week would have a special signification to it. We have an epistle from Barnabas, again, very early document from the 1st century. I will make a beginning of the 8th day, that is a beginning of another world. For that reason also we keep the 8th day. By the 8th day they mean the first day of the week, by the way. The day also on which Jesus rose again from the dead. And then lastly, you have history and tradition. Now, this is a document called the Didache, or the Teaching of the 12. Again, probably the earliest Christian document apart from the New Testament that has survived. And this is definitely from the 1st century. But every Lord's Day, note there the phrase Lord's Day, it's the same Greek phrase, what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11:20, used in Revelation 1:10. If you remember, that's when John the apostle says that he was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day, and then he had visions. Gather yourselves together, break bread, give thanksgiving after having confessed your transgressions, so that your sacrifice may be pure. So these early Christians are already understanding phrases like Lord's Day as the first day of the week, Sunday. And then again, Justin Martyr, on the day called Sunday, all who live in cities or in the country gather together to one place, and the memoirs of the apostles or the writings of the prophets are read, as long as time permits. Then the Eucharist is distributed to everyone, and everyone participates in the bread and wine, over which thanks has been given, and a portion of it sent by the deacons to those who are absent. And then Clement, again, 2nd century AD, Christ rose on the 3rd day, which fell on the first day of the weeks of harvest, on which the law, that is the Torah, the law of Moses, prescribed that the priest should offer up the sheaf. Clement here, knowing his Old Testament Hebrew scriptures, is already making a connection with the resurrection of the Messiah and the festival or the harvest here. And remember, Paul talks about Jesus being the first fruits of the first harvest and so on. So they're already connecting this with the practice under the Old Covenant law of Moses regarding certain special weeks and so on. So now I want to make this clear, because sometimes we are misunderstood when we give this type of teaching. We do not teach that Sunday is a transferred Sabbath. Again, I made clear that the New Testament does not mandate, does not obligate, does not command anyone ever to keep a certain day to meet as church, as a group of believers. No. What we find are institutions, traditions, Christian traditions, making this Sunday a special day of observance. It doesn't mean that the day in and of itself is more special just because it's Sunday. No, it's because, the most wonderful thing happened, the resurrection of the Messiah. This is an interesting quote here from a book called Sunday or Sabbath, but I think they sum it up very well here. New Testament Christians did not have a day commanded for rest, but they used the first day of the week, not the Sabbath, as a day of worship. The Sabbath, Saturday in the Old Testament, was for physical rest alone, not a day of worship. Now that is key, because people who do argue for a so-called transferred Sabbath Sunday, trying to make Sunday now the new Sabbath, I don't think they quite understand what the Sabbath was, or what God says the Sabbath was meant to be. The Sabbath wasn't meant to be a day to get together and worship. No, it was simply a day of rest, remember? That's what the law says. You can go back and read the law regarding the Sabbath. So it was for physical rest alone, not a day of worship. So it's wrong to create this transfer Sabbath Sunday idea. It's true that the Catholic Church has backed some civil laws enforcing Sunday as a day of rest. Catholic popes and rulers tried to enforce by civil laws the observance of Sunday as if it were the Old Testament Sabbath, making it legalistic or ceremonial. That's an entirely different matter from starting the use of the first day as a day of worship. It's a fine line we walk as Christians. There are clear commandments we must obey, clear commandments that pastor teaches we have to teach congregations. But there's a fine line between doing that as an office, as a profession, and becoming the new Pharisees, isn't it?